most people really inherently understand the concept that access to basic safe water is a human right. And it's a very solvable issue. I mean, we've seen, the number of people without safe water in the world get cut by over a third since we started our work in 2008, 2009. So we really believe that it's not just a bunch of young people's idealism or, naivete, but we believe we will be the generation to push the water crisis into the history books.
Welcome back to another episode of the Creators for Change podcast, where we spotlight change makers using social media to fuel their powerful missions. We believe here that social media, when used mindfully, can become a tool for self-expression, connection, healing, and leadership. Today's episode is part of a powerful global creator initiative called Team Water, an effort to make clean water access go viral this August. We're joining thousands of creators to raise awareness and funds for one of the most urgent yet overlooked human rights issues, the right to safe, drinkable water. And to help us understand what's at stake, we're honored to welcome someone who's been doing this work for over a decade. Seth Maxwell is the founder of the Thirst Project, a youth-led nonprofit that has built hundreds of clean water projects around the world, starting when Seth was just 19 years old. Seth has been featured in Forbes 30 Under 30, 100 Making a Difference. He founded Legacy Youth Leadership, and more. Seth, welcome to the Creators for Change podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
So before we dive into the mission, I'd love to start with something light. You've been leading with purpose for a long time. So what's one moment recently that you experienced that just reminded you about why you do this work?
Oh man. There are, not to give a cop-out answer, there are so many of these, if not every day, certainly every week, because of the fact that we work, both organizations, Thirst Project and Legacy, work with quite literally tens of thousands of high school and college students. And so because of that, each one of them are innovative, selfless, passionate, inspiring young leaders who are working to measurably improve the world, whether it is specifically through the lens of the global water crisis or, at Legacy, students are working to tackle a number of different issues that really matter to them. And so, there is a student that we were literally just talking about the other day who, she is working to ensure that gender equality and education access is reached in her home state of California, by ensuring that both her actual school district, but not only that, she's working to speak to the State Board of Education to provide for free feminine hygiene products for girls who otherwise couldn't afford them, and in many cases have to miss days of school, threatening their education. And so, it's students like her, of which she is one of thousands that we work with, who I get updates on all the time, who remind me daily why we do what we do.
Yeah, and it's powerful because something that we really promote here at Creators for Change is that one person can take a stand to make a difference. And we're big advocates for, it's good to stand as a leader and to bring others with you to rise together. So even one person can inspire other people, create a ripple effect. So that's a really beautiful story. So diving into your mission of clean water. So, for people listening who maybe take clean water for granted, what would you want them to understand about the current state of the global access to clean water and just the reality that so many people are facing today?
Yeah. So the global water crisis, particularly through the lens that Thirst Project works to address, which is the very sort of human water crisis, in a very practical way, means that today there are hundreds of millions of people, upwards of 700 million people around the world who simply don't have access to very basic, safe, clean drinking water. And this isn't just a big number. In a really practical way, what this means is that all over the world, women and kids walk really long distances from their homes to whatever standing water sources are available. So this is most commonly things like rivers, ponds, swamps, but then drinking from these open, unprotected surface sources that are shared with animals that will drink and defecate in the same water sources that people drink from means that people contract really easily preventable waterborne diseases. Things like diarrheal diseases, dysentery account for more child mortality than HIV and malaria combined. And so it's hard to really, I think, fully wrap your mind around just the scope or scale of the issue, particularly in the world that we live in today, where, to your point, thankfully, it's typically not something most people in the West have to think of very often, right? You open a bottle, you turn on the tap, you sort of, I don't like to use the word like take for granted because we're not looking to shame anybody. But the truth is, like, thankfully, we don't have to think about the realities of access to clean water on a regular basis. And so what our organization does is build fresh water projects, hand pump borehole wells, spring protection systems, rainwater harvesting systems in developing communities to provide people with access to safe, clean drinking water, and then pair those with sanitation facilities and hygiene training and hygiene facilities. So, yeah, I mean, I think that for us, when we think about this as an issue, it's not just people being thirsty or a big number, but it means that consequently kids have to spend hours every day walking to get water, which means that kids are often unable to go to school or get an education simply because of the thousands of hours wasted each year just walking to get water. Consequently, it means that women often are unable to get jobs or start businesses and contribute economically to their households or upward mobility. And so it impacts not just drinking water or even health, which it does in dramatic ways, but really every aspect of life.
Yeah, it ripples to all these other areas, and it's really hard to fathom. And something that I've been really grateful for is when I was younger, we would go visit my family in Mexico. We're talking rural Mexico. And I remember probably starting third grade, like I remember having the experience of walking to get clean water. And I was young at the time, so I just remember there being like a pipe next to like a river and the water was always running. And like you said, I mean there could be animals there and that could lead to them drinking from the water and disease. So, when you experience that, especially from a young age, that really sticks with you. It sticks in your mind. And so I remember from a young age, my eyes were opened. So that leads to my next question, Seth, because you started this when you were 19. What initially opened your eyes to the clean water crisis in the first place? And what moved you to act? Because we're actually both from the state of Indiana and we were both, fortunate to not have to walk to get our water. So what made you aware and what made you want to act?
Yeah. I first learned about the global water crisis when I was about 19 from a friend of mine who she was a photojournalist at that time. And she was given this assignment where, for about a year and a half, she lived in like 15 different countries, working to document and report on the progress on, at that point, this is 2007, 2008, the UN's Millennial Development Goal, or now SDG, sort of progress in a number of different categories. And when she came back to get together, we caught up over coffee. She was just sharing stories of the findings of their work and their reporting, and a super consistent through line that at that point was new to me. I had never heard about the issue of the global water crisis. I was familiar with, the reality of extreme poverty around the world and, the intersection between poverty and education or health or food security and hunger. But kind of the common through line she kept saying was, it doesn't matter, to a degree, how many schools we build and attempt to outfit with teachers if all of the kids in the community are out walking sometimes 7 or 8 hours a day to get water. So turned out if you cared about education, you cared about water. Or, as we worked to establish these agricultural initiatives to combat food insecurity and hunger, you couldn't do so without water. So if you cared about hunger, you cared about water. And it was really the first time for me in my, young at that point life, anyone had made me aware of this, certainly the scope of it, and also how dramatically water affected so many issues, really anything that you could care about from a poverty perspective. And so that was really the moment for me that I was made aware of. And then to your question of like, how did I act or what prompted me to, I sort of couldn't not do something about it. I think it was just the world was different in so many ways then. We're talking about like 16 years ago. Social media was still so nascent. I think one of the super interesting things as we work with so many young people today is like just the rapid awareness of vast multitude of issues you could care about was not the reality for most young people at the time. Like we were pretty limited in terms of our awareness of what was happening in the world to what you could see and read on the news, what you'd learn about in school, or from like firsthand accounts from friends, family who may have gone and had these kinds of experiences. And so I think for me at that point, I was just like so sort of shook by the issue. And when you're 19 and don't know what you don't know, you're like, I have to do something about this. And so I went to school and started talking to my friends. And we didn't set out to like start an organization. We really just set out to try to raise awareness of this issue. We knew we lived at the time, in Los Angeles, and it was a city that had an enormous amount of influence and the capacity to, hopefully capture the attention of people and raise awareness. And so we just started doing events around town to get people to talk about this issue. And from that, it sort of snowballed into what would eventually become Thirst Project.
Hmm. And that's very powerful because you just knew. I always come back to that quote by Steve Jobs where he says, if you don't know what you want to do, keep looking, and with all matters of the heart, you'll know when you find it. And so it sounds like for you, like you knew, like, yeah, like this is what I meant to do, and you just started working with what you had. You started taking steps forward, doing what you could in your city. And that's the big message for everyone is if there's something calling to you, just take one step, be messy, and then things will start to accumulate over time. So now I'm curious, Seth, how did that start to accumulate over time? How did this go from just an idea to you accomplishing all these projects around the world? And what do those projects look like? What have you done?
Yeah. So, the first thing we really did, this is again like circa 2008, we just on World Water Day, I got my seven closest college friends together. We pitched in all the money we had between us, which was like less than $100. We were very much college students, and we went to our nearest grocery store, bought as many bottles of water as we could, and took to the streets of Hollywood Boulevard to give away free bottles of water so that people would stop and ask us, why are you doing this? So that we could have conversations with them and raise awareness and say, did you know this is happening? Did you know this is going on in the world? We spoke to over 1,000 people over the course of the day. Almost everybody gave back for the water they took. So we were able to turn, $70 into about $1,700, which we gave to an organization that was building water and sanitation and hygiene projects, and kind of thought we were done. Like again, that we didn't initially set out to like we're going to start a charity. But there were two people who met us that day who exchanged info with us and asked if we would come to their school and basically tell their friends what we talked about that day. So we said sure, went and spoke at those schools, and then within a month, those two schools had done fundraisers. And they reached back out to us and sent checks to us made out to the Thirst Project, which at the time is what we were calling our school club that we'd started. And it was for over $12,000 that had been raised by those two schools. And that was really the moment I would say that we realized there was pretty tremendous untapped potential in people our age, young people around this issue, particularly that at that point nobody was really educating on or activating around. And so we then decided to create the Thirst Project, which today, is a movement of several 100,000 high school and college students every year from about 600 campuses around the world. There's now Thirst Project Portugal, Thirst Project Indonesia, Thirst Project UK, Thirst Project Canada, where we send teams of young people into school campuses, typically high schools or colleges, to educate students about the issue and then challenge them to do something about it. And students and schools, in turn, will do walks or dances or video game tournaments, whatever they're good at to raise awareness and then raise money to actually fund building real water projects in communities that need it most around the world. And so, we've activated well over, 1 million students over the last 16 years who have raised tens of millions of dollars. And we commit to give 100% of all the money that students and schools raise directly to funding water projects. So we have a pretty remarkable group of donors that is led by our board, which, the board is a group of ballers who give, 25, 50, sometimes $100,000 each, knowing that all their money goes to pay for the stuff that, it takes to run the organization that nobody wants to pay for, like salaries and travel and post-its. And then they lead a group of other, brands and partners who fill in any gaps, so that all the student money raised goes to build projects. But since we started, we have built projects in 13 countries, bringing just about 700,000 people safe, clean water for life. And it's been a really exciting, encouraging process as we've grown. We're pretty hyper focused in 4 countries that we build in just now, but even within that, we're really focused on one country that by far we do the bulk of our impact in. It's a country called Eswatini. It's a small country, internationally, unfortunately, best known for having the single highest density HIV/AIDS population of any country in the world, which is relevant to the work that we do, because even if people in these communities have access to medical treatment or antiretrovirals, but still drink from dirty water sources, people's immune systems are already so compromised that the diseases they contract in the water they drink threatens to kill them much faster. So we've been working in that country for over a decade, since 2012. And we're really trying aggressively to reach 100% coverage of access to safe water, sanitation, hygiene in the country. And so it's been, like I said, really encouraging to see. I think one of the things that resonates often with people about the issue is, it's not a political issue, it's not a religious issue. I think generally, there may be some exceptions, but for the most part, most people really inherently understand the concept that access to basic safe water is a human right. And it's a very solvable issue. I mean, we've seen, the number of people without safe water in the world get cut by over a third since we started our work in 2008, 2009. So we really believe that it's not just a bunch of young people's idealism or, naivete, but we believe we will be the generation to push the water crisis into the history books. And we've seen tremendous progress towards that in the last, 16 years since we started. So, yeah, that's what we do.
Hmm. Congratulations on all of your accomplishments and just sharing it as well, because people listening, like, they have their own movements, and something like the water crisis, like, it seems so big and massive, and so some people like look at that like, oh, like, how do I even start? Like, am I ever going to make a difference? But here you are sharing that you just took it one step at a time, and I truly believe that. I heard from somewhere that life supports what supports life. So you're supporting other people, and when you do, it's like resources and other people will start to support you as well. And when you come from a place of wanting to do good, things just become easier. People start supporting you, and I don't know, it's just a magical place to be in. Now I'm curious, like, so once you have the funds and you know the community that you want to support, like, what does a project look like? Like, you going in, like, what does it look like?
Yeah, so I love that you asked the question. It's an important distinction. I would even say, I want to be so clear. I don't like go in and build water projects. The first time someone in a community might get access to a clean water project, that Thirst Project builds, the first interaction somebody will have in that community with the Thirst Project is not with some like white guy from America. We have full-time staff who are nationals from each of their own countries on the ground in each of the 4 countries that we are active in, who are the Thirst Project in that country. And so they lead and facilitate and oversee all of the implementing of our projects in those particular countries. So the first time somebody has an interaction with the Thirst Project in that space, it's from someone who looks like them, has grown up in their country, speaks their language, and says, first and foremost, hey, here's who we are, here's what we do. Do you want this? And if so, then they will engage in a dialogue relative to what each of us as 2 parties need to do to play together. And so at that point, then once a community is identified and we collect data in a needs assessment that breaks down, information like population size, waterborne disease rates, distance to current water source, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then we look to match that site with donors or funds. And once we've got, to your question, those projects funded, then the conversation shifts a little bit. And so the community has to elect a water committee made of at least 50% women, 50% men, who are actually tasked with managing both the maintenance for repair of that water project once it's completed, but also ensuring that everybody in that community has equal and adequate usage of that supply. So it's clear from the beginning, this isn't my water project as thirst project. It's not, the chief of this community's water project. This is this community's site. Similarly, then they have to open up what's called an operations and maintenance fund. This is a bank account that the community contributes a predetermined amount of money per month to that they agree upon. So it could be as little as like 5 cents per household per month or 10 cents per household per month. We don't have access to the account, but the point being, it's not really a question of if a water project at some point needs repair or maintenance. It's a question of when. These are physical objects. And so if you've got 200 people or 300 people in a community using the same water point every day, 365 days a year for a few years, eventually you're going to need to change a hand pump, change a gravel pack, fix a sanitary seal. And so that committee is trained on not only how to diagnose and actually make those maintenance and repairs, but also they should have their own funds independent of us set aside to do so. So once we sort of complete all that process, then our team on the ground will hire local drilling companies, local for-profit contractors with large rigs that are able to drill 200 to 300 feet, tapping into already existing water tables, building these water projects for these communities. We will do hydrogeology and groundwater surveys to determine the best location to drill. Drilling will happen, construction, which the community is involved to a degree in the construction process, both so there's a sense of sweat equity and ownership, but also so that the community knows how to make those maintenance and repairs when it comes up. Then once it's almost complete, we'll do pump tests to assess the quality of water and yield of the actual borehole or project. And then, like I said, the committee and the community is trained on not just maintenance and repair, but also sanitation and hygiene practices. The whole process takes typically 12 to 14 months in total, but that's kind of the start to finish of how that works.
Hmm. So it sounds like what you're doing is you're supporting the community, you're helping them become self-sufficient, and you're partnering with them rather than just doing the work for them and just walking away, correct?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's we would never like show up in a community and be like, we're going to build a project. It's very much from start to finish a dialogue, and very much in every aspect, the community is involved to the degree that they can be. There are some things that, simply technically are beyond the skill level of community members relative to hydrogeological or groundwater surveys, or it's not safe to have them involved in drilling. But every other aspect of construction and training on maintenance and repair, they're pretty heavily involved in.
I love that approach. I love that because then they're learning how to be self-sufficient and if something breaks or something needs repair, like they're not naive to what's going on. So that sounds like a really efficient approach. You touched on this earlier, but I kind of want to dive a little bit deeper. So, can you paint a picture of what actually happens to communities or even just individuals when they're forced to drink contaminated water? Like, what kind of health effects are we talking about, like in the physical body?
Yeah, so each community is different. So it's hard to generalize, but some of the biggest and most consistent waterborne diseases that we engage with or that we see cause the most damage would be things like dysentery, diarrheal diseases, cholera, schistosomiasis. And so each of those express themselves differently symptomatically. Each of them have different threats relative to mortality rates, but from a health and human services perspective, drinking unsafe water absolutely skyrockets waterborne disease rates.
Yeah. And what shifts
Hmm.
have you noticed? Like, after you support a community and maybe you check back in a few years later, what shifts do you notice in their community overall?
Yeah. So the things that we measure that, at least internally, we would point to as metrics of success isn't just like how many water projects have we built or even how many people have we, been able to help get access to safe water. Those are helpful, meaningful metrics at a surface level. But the things we really want to see happen are, can we observe over time a reduction in waterborne disease rates? Can we observe over time a reduction in waterborne mortality rates? Can we observe over time a increase in enrollment in school? And can we document over time an increase in employment or business ownership of women? Those are really like the big four things that for us would trigger like metrics of success. And so part of that on the front end just requires data collection from a survey perspective. So our teams on the ground, when they're carrying out that very first needs assessment, all of those are metrics that they're collecting data on. What are waterborne disease rates in this community? What are the waterborne mortality rates? How many students are currently enrolled in school? How many women are currently employed or own businesses? And then on the back end, when they do their checkups, which does happen essentially annually, they're able to then observe those changes over time.
Got it. That makes sense. So it seems like so many things are connected here because, water affects our physical health, and then I'm sure that goes to affect our mental health in many ways. That affects, woman and gender and, just infant mortality rates. So it's all tied together. So it's awesome that you're measuring it. So one thing that I know really helps people paint a picture of what's going on is just like storytelling. Because when it comes to communicating information, like we could share stats, we can share all the data that you collect, but what really helps it stick in people's minds and helps them see the impact is storytelling. So with that being said, what's like a story that's stuck with you, either from a community that you supported or even from like a student activist who you've supported with increasing clean water access.
Yeah. Not unlike the response I gave at the beginning, where I talked more about kind of how inspiring the students we work with are. There are endless numbers of stories of people that we have seen get access to clean water through the work that we do. And the stories themselves are so deeply inspiring. But I guess the one that stands out to me the most is probably from 2015. I was on a field visit with my mom, right? And so I think just by nature, like the trip experience was unique for me. My mom was getting to see our work firsthand. Again, we're not like we really actively work to like not be a like white savior organization. So we don't do like these like mission trips where we send people to build projects. This was really just her coming with me to like check it out and see the work that we do. But we went, she and we followed these two women who basically showed us from the completed water project that had been built in their community to the old water source that they and their community used to be forced to rely on before this project was completed. And so we walked with these two women, one of which had her relatively newborn baby, sort of strapped to her back. And for context, like it's hot. It's like 105 degrees. We're sweating. We're walking sort of through these woods, then down these like pretty steep hills until we eventually get to this like dry riverbed. Also, for context, at this particular time in Eswatini, they were experiencing, as far as recorded history goes, the most significant drought the country had seen in like centuries. And so we get to this dry riverbed, and it's clear that there's often water flowing through there, but there's none at this point, right? And so these women start digging in the basin of this riverbed to try to get to water. And they're explaining, this is what we used to do to get access to clean water. We would walk from our community about a mile down this, like through these woods, down this hill into this place to get water. And as we're looking around, there are quite literally two dead cattle that are like decomposing in the riverbed, obviously contaminating the watershed. And then similarly, beyond the fact that it's hot, these women are, digging through what is clearly contaminated water as it starts to filter through the actual riverbed itself. And I think most impactfully for me, as the woman who was sort of explaining this process to us, it's the woman who was carrying her baby on her back. And she says, yeah, in fact, I went into labor with her while my friend and I were down here collecting water, like 2 months ago. And she tells the story of like having to get back to the community and then give birth to her daughter. And we're all just, like so taken by this incredible experience. And she finishes by saying, knowing that she will never have to do that, will never know what that experience is like, means everything. And so that was obviously just like, I think, physically we were experiencing these elements and like so taken by what we were being told. But that's one of hundreds of thousands of stories like it. Not to sound like melodramatic, but water really does impact every aspect of life. And so it's so transformative.
Wow. The fact that you get to hear those stories from people who you help and how it's transformed their life. I mean, I'm sure even that's like super eye-opening and it just makes your work so fulfilling. And you're right. I mean, water is so basic, but it's everything. It's how we function, it's how we live. Everything is connected to water. All of life is connected to water. So thank you for sharing that and opening our eyes because it's stories like that that help people who maybe didn't have those experiences to really see how serious this issue is and why it's important to take a stand. So with that being said, what advice would you have, especially for like a young person who care so deeply about something, what advice do you have if they don't know where to start, especially if they maybe don't have a social media platform or they haven't found their voice? What's like something small, like a practical action that they could take today that could make a difference?
Yeah. So I think first of all, once you figure out what the thing that you care about is, right? Maybe it's not the water crisis, right? The water crisis doesn't have to be your thing. I care deeply about the water crisis, but there are so many deeply worthy and critical issues that, both our country and our world are facing that need people to help raise awareness of, volunteer for, raise money for, come up with innovative solutions to. And so the first thing, once you identify what that thing is, if you don't know where to start, I can almost certainly guarantee you there are organizations or individuals who are working to provide solutions to those problems that would love your help. So the first thing I would do is just, man, research who's already working in that space. One of the things, and I'm gonna sound probably deeply hypocritical here for a second, but one of the things that people often ask is like, man, I'm really passionate about, I want to start a nonprofit that is addressing this thing or a movement that's addressing this issue. And in many cases, if not always, there are already people who are subject matter experts who have devoted decades of their lives to working in that space where from a resource perspective, it probably makes more sense to collaborate. And so whenever someone says, I want to start a nonprofit, what do I do? My first answer is don't. And I follow it up with, unless it is going to be the first, the only, better, faster, or cheaper in some way than someone who's already working in the space, which then, one of those five categories opens you up to a whole host of other opportunities, right? Like when we started Thirst Project, there were dozens and dozens of like prominent water organizations, but not a single one exclusively was focused on educating and activating young people around the issue. And then as we've grown, similarly, there are groups working in each of the four countries that we work in, but we are really the dominant player in the country of Eswatini and hyper focused in that community and those countries. And so I would say really figure out then, are there already people whose work you respect and who are doing good work that you can provide what it is that you are good at, whether it is through raising awareness. You might not feel like your social media platform is super huge, but like the truth of the matter is it often only takes one, right? Like who knows who one of the people who you know or who follow you may then go on to get involved with, whether that is through volunteering their time, giving really significant gifts, whatever that might be. So I would say like find people who are doing great work that you respect in the space that you want to work in and reach out to them and see how you can leverage and offer what it is that you're good at to help that issue that you care about. If there's truly nobody like working in that space, then you could look at, do you want to start an organization? But I think the truth of the matter is, especially for young people, which I am decidedly not anymore. I was once upon a time, but like the truth of the matter is, like the most powerful asset you have on your side right now is your youth, which I know sounds like super cheesy and like altruistic, but the truth of the matter is, like when you don't know what you don't know, it really removes a lot of the like limiting variables that people give themselves that prevent them from taking action. Similarly, once you figure out how to do or address whatever it is that you want to do or whatever issue you want to address, if you are able to come with a coherent, compelling, like articulate, clearly measurable solution to that problem and bring it to other old people that you want to support your initiative financially, from a expertise or resource perspective, they are often so taken or caught off guard because it is candidly not what they expect, that it is like the most valuable asset you have on your side. The number of doors that, like when I was younger, opened because people were like, oh, wow, look at this group of young people who are doing this thing that, like, frankly, we didn't expect to do of them. I think because you are so underestimated, it is like a deeply powerful resource if you can show up prepared, articulate, charismatic, and measurably.
I would actually agree with that. I want to second you on that one. I mean, because honestly, I think some people like I understand like the motivation to start a nonprofit, but like at the end of the day, what matters is the cause. And if it's more efficient for you to contribute to another nonprofit, I mean, I'm sure like some people would even be willing to mentor someone who's younger in exchange for the young person bringing new ideas to the table. And young people, I mean, a lot of them have like they know social media. They know what works, they know how to post, they keep up with the trends. That's even a good value exchange. Like, hey,
Well,
like I can help you with your social media, and then maybe there's like a mentorship and mutual relationship. And maybe you could speak on this too. Like the nonprofits, there's a board. And so maybe eventually you could even join the board because the board, like you can't sell a nonprofit. But maybe you could just become part of the board and just help that nonprofit live on throughout time.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, absolutely, 100%.
Yeah. Yeah, big time. And I love what you said that unless you have like a more efficient way or a quicker way, then maybe you can consider starting a nonprofit, or you could bring that stuff to the table of an already established one, and they have the resources to actually execute upon it.
Totally.
You don't have
Yeah.
to build from the ground up. So I love that. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. That's really good advice for young people.
Yeah.
So now I'm curious that because you started this when you're super young. Like what motivated you to do that? And were you scared at all when you started so young?
Um, well, so like again, I didn't set out like, oh, I'm going to start a charity. It was a very sort of evolutionary process that sort of unfolded very naturally. But if there was a moment where like there was a clear decision that had to be made of like, oh, am I going to do this? Am I going to try to make this an organization and build it and run with it and devote what would be, essentially the better part of my young life to it? It was really that moment, not even when we like incorporated the organization, because still at that point, like we were all volunteers. We were all, that first year and a half, 2 years, like we were all just like seeing what it could be. And it was really about year two, where there was a clear moment where we realized if I or someone else does not like commit to taking this on and growing it and scaling it and building it from what it was at that point, which was meaningful, but into what it could be, it would probably die. And so that moment for me, it was scary in the sense that like, my degree is in theater, right? Like I didn't get an MBA, I didn't study nonprofit management, I certainly didn't study hydrogeology or groundwater. And so there was that moment where I was really having to wrestle with the decision of like, do I do this? Do I, for the foreseeable future, 5, 10 years, like make this my career? Um, and if so, A, what does that mean that I'm giving up? B, what are the competency gaps that I know that exist in me that I'm going to need to very quickly like surround myself with people who are excellent at those things to ensure that we can build something that is going to scale and be meaningful. And so the fear wasn't like, you know, there wasn't really a ton of fear of like, what if it fails? Because at that point, like, it was just a passion project. But the fear was more, I guess, personally around like, oh man, like, I think this is what I want to do. I'm definitely deeply passionate about it. I think there was a little bit of imposter syndrome to a degree of like, am I the right person to do this? Even though I had started it, like, am I the person to take it from where it was to where it could be? And I think if I've ever done anything well from a leadership perspective, I have always been painfully honest about the many things that I know nothing about. And I decided a long time ago not to pretend that I knew things that I didn't know. So if I tell you I know something, you should probably pay attention because it is so rare. But all of that to say, I then went and found people who were great at those things, right? At the time, like I knew how to tell a story. I grew up as a storyteller. I grew up doing theater, and I can still tell a compelling story. But I didn't know how to structure a finance plan for an organization. I didn't know how to build a marketing strategy for an organization. And so I went and found people who were great at operations, finance, marketing, and did the one thing that I knew how to do, which was tell a story and convince them to come around the table, mostly in the form of our board early on, and give their skills, their acumen, their experience to helping design what the org would be and where it would go. And so I think there was definitely some fear. It was less fear about like, what if it fails? It was more fear about like, am I the right person for this? I think I could be, but only if I am like really well supported. And so, I think like the key where you like get in trouble is when you pretend you know things you don't know, and then like it becomes pretty apparent pretty quickly. So I guess yeah, there was some fear, but not like crippling fear, not like um, you know, should someone do this? It was pretty clear we should continue down this road. And I really loved it. There was some uncertainty because I was on one path that I like really thought was where I was going to go. And then this took like a very strong deviation. But I think I wouldn't change it for anything.
Yeah, and even that alone is a skill, being able to find people who know more than you, bring them together and kind of like mastermind, like figure things out together. And I love how humble you are. Because I noticed that as a common theme, especially with younger people, is they'll act like they know something or they don't admit when they don't know something, but it's actually a strength to admit that you don't know something. And there's no shame around it. I think people carry around the shame, like, oh, I'm going into this, I should know everything. But no, like, it's good to be honest because then
The
that's,
danger in pretending that you know it all or you have it all figured out is then, first of all, nobody does, right? Like there are people who are practitioners of medicine or science who have been in their field for 40 years, 50 years, who have doctorates and who like acknowledge that it is a practice, right? Acknowledge that there are things that they do not know. And so the danger in feeling like you have to have it all figured out is A, it removes the opportunity for someone else to come alongside and help you, which you're going to need. You are going to need people who have resources, whether that is money, experience, opportunities, communities that can join you, right? And so you basically, when you present as if we've got it all, you should, support us because we got it all figured out. That doesn't really, it's not inviting. It doesn't give people the opportunity to join you. The other thing though is inevitably when you find yourself in a situation where you don't actually know everything about it and the posture that you've taken publicly is that you do, it really limits your ability to get help from the people that you need to get help from to solve the problem. And so it's a lose-lose on either way. And you mentioned something earlier just about, again, speaking particularly to young people about the opportunity to collaborate with people in any space or any issue you care about. And I think you specifically gave the example of like young people are obviously more technologically savvy and savvy on social media than like old people, right? There's a sort of yes, duh, like we know that. The interesting thing I'll tell you is this. There are gonna be times when you as a young person, and I'm not just speaking to you, I'm talking to like your audience, but like there are gonna be times whether you're like in your career, like you're in your future job, or you're working on like a passion project or starting a movement or things that you care about, or you're collaborating with other organizations, there are gonna be times when like you see the way that your company or your organization that you're working for are doing things, and you're like, oh, there's a different way, there's a better way, because you are a fresh set of eyes, because you are untainted by the way things have always been done, which get us the results that we currently have. And so there are going to be times where you see the way that an organization or a company or a group is doing something, and you have a different way because you are right, right? And in those moments, you should absolutely say something, right? Like the subway rule. If you see something, say something. There are also, however, going to be times when you are in a job or in an organization or building a movement and you have a different way of doing things or thinking about things, because you are wrong. And you need to listen to somebody who's like been around the block. And I can't tell you how in the moment to know which is which, how to differentiate which is which. What I can tell you is I would rather speak up and be wrong than not and just continue to have the status quo be the case. I can tell you it helps to be very charming and also to move in humility, right? There's a way to bring that idea forth that isn't just, hey, you crappy old person, like you don't know what you're talking about because there's a better way. I think that the way you bring it really matters, but I would always rather err on the side of speaking up and being wrong than not and finding that I was right 6 months or a year down the line and we wasted time and money and resources that could have gone to help advance whatever it is that I'm working on. And so I would say the balance of knowing, again, this comes back to like really knowing what you know and knowing what you don't know and being honest about those things. And when you know something, like say it. And when you don't know something, acknowledge it and be solicitous of the people who know more and can help you.
These are all traits of good leadership. And I think that's one of the main messages of this episode is just how to be a good leader. And you're right. I mean, that comes with speaking up because it's better to speak up than not speak
Oh,
up at all. And even if you are wrong, own it. Own it in a really healthy way. I think that's where many people get tripped up is that they're afraid to be wrong and like look a certain way. But there's a healthy way to say, you know what? Yeah, I thought this, but I was totally wrong. You're
I
right.
get it wrong all the time. I got it wrong a ton at Thirst Project. I get it wrong all the time at Legacy. And again, because of the environment we've created where I invite people who are better than me at many different things into that collaborative process, there is then a shared effort when we get it wrong. And it's easy to go, oh, crap, that was on me, or we should have done this differently. But it also gives you the grace then when you get it wrong, where people are like, okay, cool, try again with experience, right? Like you're gonna get it wrong. I get it wrong all the time.
You know, the crazy thing too, it's not so black and white. It's not always right or wrong. There could be two right approaches, but maybe there's just one that's better. And
Sure.
that's why like it's good to have a board or like group of people you talk to so where you could all talk it out, look in each other's blind spots and think, okay, collectively, what's the best choice forward?
Yeah.
So I love that. I love that we're sharing this. And I want to backtrack just a little bit to something you said earlier because I related to it. And I think majority of people relate as well. You had kind of like a, I don't want to say a fear, but there was a voice in your head that said, am I the right person to do this? Like I studied theater, I could tell a good story. I experienced that too. When I first started a different for-profit business I have, I was like, who am I? I studied marine biology. What do I know about starting a business? Do I need to go back to school? The beauty of, the online world is that we can teach ourselves a lot of things. A lot of the answers are out there. You can get mentors. And so whatever you studied, like don't feel shame like, oh, I chose the wrong thing. Own it. If you own it, like, yeah, I studied this thing like you. I studied theater. I could tell a good story and you own that. You even told a story on this episode. For me, for my marine biology degree, I own the fact that it ties to water. I should have mentioned this earlier. I studied marine biology. It ties to water. I own the fact that it was actually very creative. Marketing is what it takes to protect the oceans, because marketing is just getting people aware that there's a solution to a problem. That's what marketing is, but we've turned it into something that's salesy. So I own the fact. I was like, you know what? I actually know marketing very well because for 4 years in college, I was trying to sell the idea that, hey, we should protect the oceans. This is a solution to a big global problem. Here's some things that we could do. And I sold people on practicing those things, a more eco-friendly lifestyle. So, with that being said, I'm curious for you because with your storytelling, like, how did you own it? Like, what are maybe some creative communication outlets that you did during theater that you apply for Thirst Project? Maybe like social media videos or campaigns.
Well, first of all, I think there are some universal truths about storytelling, right? And not to sound like super woo-woo or hippy-dippy, but I still believe, even though I have not been professionally in the sort of theater or film and TV space for a long time, like I believe that storytelling is a sacred profession. Whether back when our ancestors gathered around the glow of a campfire and told stories of the day's tales of that day's hunt, or whether it's gathering around the glow of a telephone screen or a movie screen or a TV screen, how we tell stories about who we are, what we do, shapes culture, shapes what people do, and how we live life. And so I believe it is a super sacred profession, but there are some universal truths about how you tell a compelling story, that then kind of, I believe, like supersede the mechanisms or the like tactics of what might you use to tell those stories, right? So social media, video production, written emails, speeches, presentations, events, like they all require storytelling devices to tell the story of what it is that you're doing. And those are just like tactics in the broader kind of storytelling space. And so I think for me, I really try to lean into some of those universal truths and what I know to be true about telling a good story to reach our goals, no matter what the medium.
Hmm. Yeah, so just one final question for the audience, Seth. How can people get involved with Thirst Project? What's your website? What are some steps that we can take today to support this?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you want to get involved in Thirst Project, you can bring us to your school. You can sign up to volunteer. You can fundraise or give. $25 once gives one person clean water for life. So if you go to thirstproject.org or at Thirst Project on all socials, you can get involved.
Beautiful. I will put those links down below as well as your social media and your website and everything else. So, Seth, thank you so much for sharing your story and for showing us that impact doesn't start with being perfect. It starts with showing up. So, it was an honor to have you. Thank you for being here, and thank you everyone for listening, and we'll see you for the next episode.